Leafs fam, what is up? This is the Leafs Convo. I am Norman James. Happy May 2-4, eh? If you're Canadian, you get it. If you're not, it's okay. You'll get it. Marc-andre is standing by. He and I will talk about the Marlies' thrilling 3-2 overtime win over Lehigh Valley, going up 2-0 in their conference final. They're trying to make it to the Calder Cup. Can they? I think they will. We'll also go over the Vegas Golden Knights. What's going on? 4 straight wins after losing the opener to the Jets to advance to the Stanley Cup final. The Leafs haven't been to the Cup final since '67. The Habs haven't been there since '93. Some teams have never even made the Stanley Cup final. And in their first year, Vegas is going there. You know what? Sometimes you go to that place and you get lucky. Those Golden Knights are certainly lucky, or have they earned it? More on that, plus we'll talk Caps, Lightning, and, maybe stir the pot in regards to some trade speculation. Kyle Dubas eyeing Noah Hannafin or Justin Falk? Or is he eyeing anyone down there? Mike Augello's ready to go. I'm ready to go. I know you're ready to go. The Leafs Convo starts now. And here is our friend from Buffalo, New York, buzzing from Sunday's 3-2 Marlies overtime win at Ricoh Coliseum, the one and only Mike Augello. Happy Victoria Day, my friend.
Good morning, Norman. It was a happy Victoria Day until I was driving back on the QEW yesterday, and some happy Canadian decided to drop a couple smoke bombs in the middle of the QEW and almost got me into an accident. But other than that, I'm fine, and thank you very much.
You are an honorary Canadian, considering your proximity to this wonderful country. So he is you, and you are him. Gail. So what about that game? That was just incredible. My kids were watching. They came in from outside. A beautiful day on the compound here in suburban London, Ontario. Everybody's supposed to be outside, but once that thing got really heated in overtime, the kids came in. They're on the Marlies train now. They want to see the Marlies win a Calder Cup, and I've told them it's the kind of the secondary version of the Stanley Cup, trying to explain this to 8- and 6-year-olds. But, you do your best. Right. So we're watching the game. It's really exciting, and the Miro Aaltonen puts it away on Vince Janssen in on the goal. Fun stuff. The place goes nuts. The Marlies are up 2-0. I don't think they're going to be pulling a Capitals against the Tampa Lightning in the Eastern Conference Final. I think they're going to finish this thing off, but what a way to conclude it. What did you say?
Well, I mean, it was not prototypical of the way that the Marlies have played the last few games. They've won 7 playoff games in a row. They won Game 5 against Utica, 4 straight against Syracuse, and now the first 2 against Lehigh Valley. And in most of those games, they got off to a quick start. They got the lead. And then I don't know if they coasted, and you can say in all those games, but in most of them, they widened the lead and were fairly comfortable. In this game, Lehigh scored the first goal. The Marlies had 20 shots in the first period and got the tying goal, but it was a struggle to beat Alex Lyon, who's probably going to be a backup with the Flyers next year. And there's some NHL players on Lehigh Valley too. So it was a spirited contest, and Lehigh Valley got the lead in the third period. I think it was a little bit of a disputed goal because Travis Dermott looked like he'd been interfered on the play, and he coughed it up, and Vorobiev, the Phantoms forward, jumped on it. But then Grundstrom scored 23 seconds later, tied up the game, and goes into overtime. And after that one little scare, the goal that wasn't, Freddie Gauthier puts a stick in, hits the mesh, and everybody thought, except the people who were watching, thought that goal was in. But there was a series where Timothy Liljegren got caught up the ice. There was a 2-on-1. Travis Dermott made a great diving play to prevent the 2-on-1. But later in the same play, Garrett Sparks made an incredible glove save. And then moments later, Aaltonen, as you said, gets the winner. I mean, the Marlies are a really deep, really talented team, but Lehigh Valley is not going to be an easy out. So I think they're going back for 3 in Allentown, and I would not be surprised if the series comes back to Toronto up with the Marlies up 3-2. But it's not going to be easy.
Mike, you're just trying to gin up some drama. You know what's going to happen here. The Marlies are an unstoppable force. Fun fact, the gentleman who took the shot that Garrett Sparks made the spectacular save on, TJ Brennan, was a guest on this podcast when it was produced at a local television station. I don't know if you remember that, Mike.
I do, and ironically, Garrett Sparks after the game said, TJ Brennan is one of the Marlies players that stayed after practice and took shots on him for many a practice, and said that when you do that, sometimes the goaltender will learn some tendencies, and I guess he took that knowledge and robbed Brennan of a potential game winner. But it was a solid performance by the Marlies, but you could tell after the game, Sheldon Keefe was like, well, we got on the right way, on the right side of this, but I think he knows that we have gotten away with a mediocre effort, and he's expecting more when they go on the road starting Wednesday.
Did Garrett Sparks credit all of the smartasses on social media who took shots at him over the years?
He didn't. I mean, the only thing he said was that because the crowd was chanting Sparky at a couple times, especially after that glove save, that he says, that was like a moment that he appreciated. And that was like the first time that he really, in 5 years that he really felt that acceptance, which is ironic because, in terms of what may happen in the months ahead, and probably we're going to talk about that next, is the fact that Garrett Sparks might be a piece that the Maple Leafs are potentially shopping because he is having such a great year in the American Hockey League.
Are you sure they were calling him Sparky or Sparksy? Sparky sounds more like an American nickname. Sparksy sounds more Canadian. I thought it was Sparksy.
I couldn't pick up.
We should debate it, Mike. We should debate it ad nauseum and get everybody to chime in on the YouTube channel.
I couldn't pick up the extra S from the 8,000 people at the Ricoh Coliseum. And Sparky is the old Sparky is the term for the electric chair in the United States. So maybe.
Well, thanks for that, Mike. We appreciate lots of fun facts on this edition of the Leafs Convo. It's the Victoria Day edition, the May 2-4 edition. Norman James, along with marc-andre, your Toronto Marlies, a 3-2 winner over the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, up 2-0 in their Calder Cup conference final. Looking pretty good going back to Pennsylvania. I think the Marlies are going to put this thing away in 4 straight. They're an unstoppable force, but Mr. Augello seems to think the series is coming back to Toronto, and that's going to work out for him because that means more writing, more content on his behalf that goes out to the masses. We get to enjoy that, so it's all gravy. The Marlies, do you see anything in terms of tweaking that they're going to have to do in order to not only keep their game composed for however long this series lasts, but clearly they have some work to do, and they didn't want to get this far only to bow out in the finals, knowing what they've accomplished to this point and what they still have in the tank, or at least what we think they still have left in the tank?
Well, it's funny because, like I said, Sheldon Keefe was pressing his team to give him more after that game. And, that game could have gone either way. But if you look at it, right now their leading scorer is on their 4th line. Trevor Moore has 11 points, and he's a 4th line guy with Mason Marchment and Adam Brooks. So they're getting balanced scoring. They're getting incredible production out of that top line of Grundstrom, Miro Altonen, and Andreas Janssen, who also has 11 points. And he actually is the scoring leader because he's done it in less games than Moore has. But just the point that a guy who's on your 4th line is leading the team in scoring is an indication you have 4 balanced lines that provide different things. 3 defensive pairings, which have been pretty consistent now with the return of Callie Rosen from injury. And the bottom pairing, at least at the start of the game, was Travis Dermott and Timothy Liljegren, and then they mixed and matched during the game. So there's a lot there, and I don't think there's much more than that Sheldon Keefe can get out of this team, but I think he's going to keep them on their toes and prod and do what a good coach does, and try to get the most out of his players.
What kind of celeb sighting were you able to commit while at Ricoh Coliseum? Kyle Dubas there, Mike Babcock. We've seen a couple of flashes up to the press box during the broadcast on Leafs Nation, the Leafs Nation network, and we've noticed some of the brass, some of the intelligentsia, some of the big decision makers. Did you see anybody there? It's not to drum up any sort of expectation or lead anybody to believe that there's something going down, but clearly this is the only team within that hockey organization still playing. There's a lot at stake for the players. There's decisions to be made, and you're going to have guys like Kyle Dubas and his staff looking at some of these guys and thinking of how they might be able to slot into the big team come September. So who have you noticed there?
Well, it was ironic, and some of these just because they're Toronto area residents. There was 5 ex-NHL general managers at the game yesterday. Brian Burke, who's now in the media with Sportsnet, he was in the press box, and former GM Pierre Pagé. I don't know who he's associated with, but I'm sure he's probably scouting for an NHL team.
Pierre Pagé was there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Craig believe still scouting for Edmonton, and Rick Dudley, who is now the new director of player personnel for Carolina, and Jimmy Devellano, who's still part of the hierarchy with the Detroit Red Wings. So, on top of that, there were probably, I'd say, 15 scouts as well as most of the Leafs hierarchy. So, with the conference finals going on and only the Western and the Eastern Conference final in the AHL, you're going to have a higher than usual amount of scouts. And I'm not, Rick Dudley is at, I'd say, 50% of the Marlies games because he lives in the sort of I think he still lives in Western New York, but he scouts the Golden Horseshoe for lack of a better term. So I wouldn't read too much into it, but whenever somebody from Carolina is watching the Leafs, I always gravitate towards, okay, these teams are perfect fits for a potential trade, and maybe that's something and maybe it's nothing.
So clickbait, Mike. So clickbait, man. You're just trying to get people to click on your stuff and read your knowledge. Yes. This is the Leafs Convo. I'm Norman James, along with my partner in crime, Marc-andre. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you don't want to, you're missing out. If you have, thank you so much, Leafs fam, hockey world fam. We appreciate that very much. We are growing every single time Mike and I collab for a podcast. We have some really big things planned for the next days, weeks, and months ahead, even into the off season, even during those down periods when you think there's going to be nothing going on. Mike and I have some special feature type shows that we're going to compose for you. So please like and subscribe to the page. Tell your friends. It means a lot to us. We're unstoppable, just kind of like the Toronto Marlies. So, Mike, you're sure that there wasn't a GM job fair happening near Ricoh Coliseum with all of these ex-GMs, unemployed GMs? Pierre Pagé, for goodness sakes. Pierre Pagé. Did they shut the place down, and did everybody try to get an autograph from the guy? Pierre Pagé, the guy's a legend.
Well,
I don't know.
Well, I don't know if there was a job fair, but I mean, hey, when you're a former,
I should be there.
Yeah, when you're a former general manager, you still have a valued opinion in some of these organizations. So, that's, I think, with the exception of Burke, who seems to be wanting to take a run at a job with Sportsnet, and actually, I have to say that I've heard him in a couple instances on other shows, and he was pretty good.
He's good.
So, yeah. So I mean, it's
that guy.
They're good people, and then they have an eye for talent. So
that guy came into Toronto like 20 feet tall, hulking, throwing out all of these delusions of grandeur, the truculence, pugnacity, testosterone, all these just crazy alpha type words, and he was badass. I'm going to trade this guy. I'm going to get Kessel. I'll trade 5 first-rounders for Tavares, all this stuff. Like 4 years later, he's kicked out the back. He's just kicked out the back door. He can't even get his stuff from his desk. He was such a badass, and then he just he exited the stage left with his tail between his legs. It's just insane. Now he's back in Toronto. He's always had this love for Toronto because we know that Toronto's the capital of hockey. You can't dispute that. I mean, I don't go around talking about that or advocating that, but sometimes you do get into these discussions where someone will say, well, Vancouver's the heartbeat of the game, or Montreal will say this is where the class and elegance of hockey originated. It's like, all right, guys, we know where the capital of the game is. We know where everybody situates themselves when things are happening, when there's an important moment, when there's a big event. This is where it happens. More players in the history of the game have come from Canada More players out of Canada have come from Ontario. Most of those players have come from the GTA. So this is the capital of game. This is where you want to be. And that's why guys like Brian Burke, regardless of his history with the Maple Leafs and the way it kind of finished on a whimper, coming back and doing what he can just to be a part of the action. This is Leafs Convo. Mike Augello, Norman James. Let's transition from the AHL to the NHL. The Vegas Golden Knights beating the Winnipeg Jets 2-1 in Game 5. They're off to the Stanley Cup final, Mike. Winnipeg wins that first game, and then the Golden Jets would sound great, Bobby Hull. The Golden Knights win 4 straight. Like, this is bizarre. Like, what? How do you compute that? You win the first, then lose the next 4, and now it's the Golden Knights going on to the Stanley Cup final. Like, it's surreal, but it's fun too, right?
Yeah, it's funny because I tweeted after the game. I said, if the usual scenario, if a script writer had gone to Hollywood and offered to a producer the script of an expansion team, not just making the playoffs, but getting to the Stanley Cup final in their first year, I think he would have called A for security and B for a drug test. So, yeah. So, I mean, but sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. And in this instance, I mean, let's just say this. I mean, and I've talked to, other reporters, and they all say the same thing. Boy, is Seattle going to have a tough time following this up. But NHL teams are going to wise up that what they did in terms of Vegas regarding giving them first round picks to take bad contracts, David Clarkson, or extra, or play a young player like Jonathan Marchessault to take Riley Smith's contract off the books, and then both of them are successful, or leaving exposed a young defenseman like Nate Schmidt instead of a guy like Brooks Orpik. Who I'm not sure if he had a no move, but still, I mean, one guy is 24, the other one is in his mid 30s and pretty clearly on the end of a pretty good career. They're going to realize, they're not going to be giving out no move clauses as much, and they're not going to be giving expansion teams extra picks and extra players to be more successful quicker. But that being said, the stars were aligned. Everything happened. They got a Stanley Cup winning goaltender who I believe, Marc-Andre Fleury, I don't care if he doesn't stop a puck in the Stanley Cup final. He should win the Conn Smythe. There's no way that team gets anywhere this season without Marc-Andre Fleury. And to get to the Stanley Cup final as an expansion team, like I said, he could let in 80 goals in the final. He's still the Conn Smythe Trophy winner.
Wow, Mike, I love when you pontificate. The passion is just coming out. The Leafs Convo does that to you, right? Everything's just so easy and mundane until you get into this podcast realm, and then you just go wild. I love it. You're opening up. This is a coming of age for the man. Marc-Andre Fleury, he's won 3 cups, right? They've won
Correct.
3. Did he ever win a Conn Smythe behind the great Sidney Crosby, or did Crosby sweep them?
I think Crosby swept them, although I think Malkin won one of them. I'm not 100% sure, but he did. He never won. And, if you want to take the argument that he's won, he's responsible for 1.5 cups because he was the goalie in 2009. He was the backup in 2016, and he played in the first 2 rounds in 2017. So you can say he won 1.5, but
that's weird.
But well, yeah, but Matt, ironically, Matt Murray, who was a Sault Ste. Marie product, who, if you think of this, Kyle Dubas tried to get as part of the Phil Kessel deal, but couldn't get Pittsburgh GM Jim Rutherford to give him up. He's the guy. The guy has won 2. He won 2 Stanley Cups in his first 2 years, so that's pretty good. So, but Marc-Andre, in my mind, Marc-Andre Fleury is now a Hall of Famer.
Wow. And people I know Pittsburgh Penguins fans wanted this guy gone, and he was a laughing stock. It was, that's the thing, ebbs and flows, right? The journey of a hockey player, especially one who's of a high stature. You come out gangbusters, you play well, you vie for Vezinas, you have goals against averages hovering around 2, you look great, and then all of a sudden you fall off, your game falls apart, and I mean you go from being the starter, being the centerpiece, to a backup, to being a contributor. It's odd. And then you you get out of the spot, or you get out of the shadow of the great Sidney Crosby. You go to an expansion team, and you're probably thinking to yourself, well, you know what? I'll keep making however many $1 million a year for as long as I can. Pad some stats, then go to the cottage and just hang out on a boat. And here you are in the Stanley Cup final, and you asking yourself, how does this happen? But sports is odd, man. And you go from the position where you're looking at Marc-Andre Fleury and saying, all right, man, wrap it up. Time to hang up the skates, to holy smokes, this guy could win the Conn Smythe. This is kind of fun. It's the resurrection of a career that we thought was in its twilight. It's hard to explain, but heck, let's just go along for the ride.
Well, remember only a few years ago, he got out goaltended in a series by Ilya Bryzgalov. So how things have changed. He reclaimed his his mantle as a top goaltender in the years following in Pittsburgh, and I mean, I think was generally loved by the Penguins fans when he departed for Vegas. And now I bet you the ratings in Pittsburgh will be extremely high for the Cup final, and I bet you most Penguin fans will be rooting for Marc-Andre Fleury.
Mike, your early morning tweets are almost as anticipated as President Trump's.
Please don't put me in that category.
No, I know. I'm trying to your iconic status with his. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah,
what I'm getting at though, your tweets today regarding Vegas getting through to the final and having that relate or tie into the futility streak that is the Maple Leafs coming nowhere near that final too. What's the correlation there? Are Leaf fans like the ones you've interacted with upset that Vegas is into the final as an expansion team? This is nothing personal against. This has nothing to do with the Maple Leafs. This is just the stars aligning, or the planets aligning, the stars colliding. I don't know. It's just wild.
I think it's the fans of a certain generation. You got to remember, I'm in my early 50s. And my brother is 11 years older than me, so he was 11 years old when the Leafs won their last cup in '67, and obviously after 51 years is getting a little bit impatient and waiting for this team to actually win. And he's lived through the ownership of Harold Ballard and the incompetence of the trade of Randy Carlyle for Dave Burrows, and Sittler and McDonald being moved out by an idiot Punch Imlach after he had torn the organization to pieces in the late 60s, and then he comes back and does it again in the late 70s after he was in Buffalo.
Were those guys all shit-faced? What was going on? What was up with them? Punch Imlach was a legend, for goodness sakes. Like, what were they doing? Like, he was a legend when he was coaching, but coming back as a general manager and tearing the organization apart. Ballard sitting in the gondola, King Clancy half asleep. What were those guys, just wasted or what?
He was a legend in Buffalo too, because he built the Sabres into a Stanley Cup contender in just 5 years. I mean, which now seems too long with Vegas winning, but at that point, getting them to a Stanley Cup final from expansion in 5 years was a Herculean task. And he was a great GM in Buffalo. But when he came back to Toronto, he came back with orders from Harold Ballard, especially because Sittler and McDonald were tied into the NHLPA, and they were asking for more money. And just stuff like that, stuff like Ballard just being a curmudgeon and interested in the almighty dollar more than winning a Stanley Cup, or even the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, who wanted the team to get a round or two, but never would go that extra step to win a cup. And then general managers, coaches, players, 51 years of something, one or the other, preventing this team from winning a Stanley Cup. And I know that the people of a certain generation see Vegas come in and win right away and say, this sucks. I hate this, but I can't do it. It's such a great story. And, it's something for the ages. And maybe if the Leafs were in the midst of, the teardown and, had no optimism going forward, I think, there would be more fans that are bitter. But the Leafs have, reason for optimism because of Matthews and Marner and where they are with the organization, and Shanahan and Dubas and Babcock, and there's reason for optimism. So I don't think that many fans should feel that angst about Vegas getting to the Stanley Cup final. But there are some people, and not just in Toronto, but Philadelphia Flyers fans who haven't won since 75, and Sabres fans who haven't won in their entire history, and St. Louis Blues fans. So, there's enough to go around. But I'm sure there's bitterness from some fans about this.
Look, the younger generation of fans, millennials, those who are extremely hockey savvy, who are really into the game and looking at it from a real alternative point of view, don't really have a connection to the angst, as you say, the weighing down of a fan's heart, and the crushing of a Leaf fan's soul that goes back decades, other than to hear about it on social media, or perhaps a parent going on about all these close calls, and kind of like us, like we're like, what are those two guys in the Muppets, Waldorf and
Statler and Waldorf.
Yeah. Statler and Waldorf. That's what we should be doing. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to get Anonymous to do some art for us. We're sitting up in the balcony of a crusty old theater, and you and I are just sitting there. Rah, 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 Vegas Golden Knights. How dare they get into the final? Us, we've been left at the altar too. Actually, the Leafs haven't even gotten to the altar, so that argument doesn't work too well. But you know what? It is what it is, Mike. It is what it is. It's a fun story. That's the thing about sports. You can break it. You can break down the data, and you can forecast certain things happen. You can forecast certain players doing certain things, right? Based on how many players are on the ice, 5-on-5, how things are going to work out individually. And as a team, this team's going to get X amount of shots. This team is going to allow this amount of shots. This team has great puck possession. This team seems to cough it up in this, on face-offs and stuff like that. But when it comes to the end result, there's just no real way of forecasting that or being able to predict that. So, and this Vegas Golden Knights situation is a prime example. How the hell did these guys get there? And it's an aberration. And I mean, this could be, again, we've never seen this happen. And how old is the NHL? 110 years? We've never seen this happen. And it's nothing personal against the Maple Leafs. It might feel like it's an added blemish to the Leafs' history of futility, but you can add the rest of the league in there too. And there's potentially, there's one team that will stand in Vegas's way of making, doing something that's never been done before, and that's either Tampa or Washington. Let's really quick talk about that. We're almost at the half-hour period, and I know our listeners just love hearing us chat and love hearing me sniffle. But that's Mr. Allergies here. I've got my neighbor next door with the windows open here. This guy mows like, I don't know, his grass grows like overnight, then he's mowing, and I mean, it's a great place out here. But anyway, so Tampa and Washington. Here's another bizarre series. Washington goes into Tampa, wins the first two on the road, and they've lost 3 in a row. They lost 2 at home and then lost another. And now they're into a situation where if they lose again, Tampa's going on to the final. And they're at home. Washington, can they get it done? My expectation is no. You just lost 3 straight after winning 2 to open up the series on the road. It's just a bizarre way for this series to unfold. But, hey, these playoffs are anything but conventional.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but it's funny because the same thing happened in the first round, except that Washington was the team that lost the first 2 at home to Columbus, and then went to Columbus and won 2 games in a row, and then won a tight game. I think it was overtime in Game 5, and then won the series. And, everybody thought that Washington slayed the Dragon when they beat the Penguins, and that all of a sudden, they were going to just romp from there on. And I said it could go one of 2 ways. It could be like the 2004 Red Sox, who finally get by the Yankees and then are completely unstoppable and beat the Cardinals no problem. Or it could be that, they choke and they shrink at the prospect of going to the final, because that's the team that they have been for most of the Alex Ovechkin era. And, after winning the first two, I'm sure people were saying, okay, there's the Caps, they've got this thing locked. It's no problem. And I'm like, no, wait. And right now,
Yeah, no question.
I mean, it's not lost on me that Andre Vasilevsky started playing well and the Tampa Bay Lightning started winning. He didn't play well in the first two games, and that was the difference. So he let in a couple goals in the last couple seconds of periods in both games, and that killed Tampa Bay's momentum. In these three games, in these three victories, he's been incredible. And Game 4, he stood on his head. It was, it was not a dominating victory by the Lightning, but they got tied in the series, and now they're up 3-2. And I would be surprised if Washington wins Game 6 to force the seventh game. Stranger things have happened, but I picked Tampa to go to the final from the very beginning of this season. I had Nashville, but then in the second round when Nashville was playing Winnipeg, I said, okay, I think Vegas is going to. So it could be Tampa and Vegas, and that's been my prediction since the second round.
Well, Mike, you're an expert, right? I mean, you are the guy. You are the oracle. And that's why I hitched my wagon to you, because I know your star is just well. Anyway, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, there you go.
Norman James with Marc-andre. You see crazy things happen in the tournament to begin with, and you ask yourself, where are we going here? And then you remind yourself that, don't worry, order will be restored. And that's kind of what we're looking at with this Tampa-Washington scenario. The Capitals slay the Dragon and Sidney Crosby and the Penguins, expending that emotional energy to finally get over that hurdle. And then they get the 2 wins over Tampa, and it's almost as if they're kind of reeling. This is gravy. They can't find their bearings, but somehow they're winning games, and then smack, they hit the wall, and here's Tampa winning 1, 2, 3, and then potentially in a position to close it out. So order seems to be close to being restored in the Eastern Conference, yet we look over to the Western Conference, and the upstart expansion, Vegas Golden Knights, are 4 wins away from the Stanley Cup. So on one hand, you have things evening out. On the other hand, on the other half of the ledger, you have a situation where it's you really can't predict anything, because it's conventional wisdom and conventional expectation being thrown out the window. So let's just see what happens tonight. Game 6, Alex Ovechkin. I want to see him win a Stanley Cup, because the guy is just one of the purest scorers we've ever seen, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be a hockey fan and be cognizant and interested and into what's going on during his era. It's just been spectacular. Yet, if he can't pull this off and he continues to wind down his career with no opportunities to win a Stanley Cup, when it's all said and done, we're going to elevate him to the status of the greatest goal scorers of all time. But he never won a Stanley Cup. Sort of along the Marcel Dion, Matt Sundin never won a Stanley Cup, and you're going to be put into that bracket of players who, hey, you've done great things, you're a Hall of Famer, you're among the greatest, but you didn't win a Stanley Cup. Real quick on that, Mike, and then I just want to ask you one more question.
Yeah, the Dan Marino of hockey. I was referred to Ovechkin, but I mean, he's clearly a Hall of Famer. He's clearly a great player, and there will be excuses with the Caps, with Backstrom being hurt and a few other things. But I just, Tampa Bay is a team that at the deadline made the move that everybody wants the Leafs to make, which is get yourself a top 4 defenseman. They traded a first-round pick, a couple prospects, and Nemestikov to get JT Miller and Ryan McDonough. And that trade has paid off. The depth that they got in that organization that paid off in terms of being able to make that trade. And if they win the Stanley Cup, maybe that's a signal to the Leafs that that's the step that you're going to have to do to get to the ultimate goal.
In hindsight, if we could go back, would trading for Ryan McDonough be the right thing for this team in the long term? Do you think, Mike? Sure, he might have helped against Boston, but was the time right to acquire someone like Ryan McDonough?
I think he would have helped them get by Boston. And I don't know if he would have re-signed after another year. So maybe that was the situation that mitigated the Leafs offering up an equal to what Tampa did. But going forward this summer, That's why if it's a scenario with Carolina, that's why I'm trading for Noah Hannafin and not Justin Falk, because there's a time limit on Justin Falk of 2 years. With Noah Hannafin, you can hold on to him for at least 4 and maybe longer. So that's a factor.
Well, our podcast that's available to you right now on YouTube, Radio Public, Anchor, iTunes. Kyle Dubas potentially exploring trades, and this is dreamed up by Mike and I, but exploring trades with the Carolina Hurricanes, defenseman potentially coming back to Toronto. We wondered whether Dubas would shoot for Justin Falk, or go big or go home and attempt to trade for Noah Hannafin. And the question that keeps coming up in the comment section of that particular podcast is, why the heck would Carolina trade Noah Hannafin? So, Mike, why would they?
Well, they've got two young defensemen on long-term contracts that were signed last year, and Brett Pesce and Jacob Slavin. They've got Falk for another 2 years at almost $5 million. He had a bad year, so you'd probably be selling him low, at least lower than his value has been in the recent past. Hannafin is an RFA, so he's going to expect to get that long-term deal like Slavin and like Pesce have got last year. And if they try to bridge him, I'm sure he's not going to be a happy camper. Plus, they have Trevor Van Riemsdyk, Jake Bean, a former first rounder, Hayden Fleury, who played this year. They're absolutely loaded on defense. So to address their areas of need, which is center and goaltending and maybe scoring, they're probably going to have to move one of those defensemen. Now, they may want to move Falk because Falk is, 26 and has a couple years left on a contract, and they clear that salary. They can use that to trade Hannafin. But if they want to get difference makers up front who can score, or a goaltender who can help them because their goaltending has been terrible, they're probably going to have to give up Hannafin. But as to whether the Leafs are really interested in Hannafin, we don't know. And they're a very tight-lipped organization, and we probably won't know until they actually make a deal. So,
well, Brian Burke is no longer the general manager. He was telegraphing everything ahead of time when he was the head of the Maple Leafs. So I'm trading 5 first-round picks. He would do all these crazy things, whereas Kyle Dubas and the Leafs now are playing it closer to the vest, as they should. I don't think they should be transparent on a lot of fronts, but when it comes to the strategy of how they're going to build this team, they don't have to tell anybody anything. My goal as a Leaf fan here, I'm 42. My goal as a Leaf fan right now, as somebody who supports the team, who's putting together this podcast and watching this thing grow, is to have this thing get to a point where this can be a main main thing for me to do 24/7 every single day. And the byproduct is supporting and being a part of something that leads to a Stanley Cup before I kick the bucket. So that'd be a lot of fun. And my hope is that with Kyle Dubas, whether he wants to come out and tell anybody what he's doing, whether he wants to suggest, throw out hints, just go and make this team better, man. Go and make this team better. Use your strategy in elevating players from the AHL. Go find players who have great metrics to support their play. Bring them in on low-cost contracts, whatever you need to do. But you're the biggest team in the game. You have tons of resources. You have Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner, you have Freddie Anderson, you have William Nylander, whether to play on the team going forward or as a trade piece. And I know people don't want to hear that, but are you going to get rid of Mitch Marner or Austin Matthews over William Nylander? Probably not. And if you want to get a big defenseman coming back via trade, Nylander's probably the guy to go. Just go and help this team win a Stanley Cup, and make the young fans happy. Allow the older fans to finally feel like there is some closure to their fandom. Feel like it was all worth something. Just go and get that done. And it's all part of the process right now. Watching the Marlies in this journey towards a potential Calder Cup, if they can hoist that thing, Mike, that does mean something, because it's done with a lot of young players who will be contributors to the Maple Leafs going forward. We got to wrap it up, Mike. Last word to you.
Well, game 3 of the Marlies and Phantoms Wednesday. It'll be on TSN2, so everybody will be able to watch. And again, I think it's been compelling hockey. The first 2 games, it should be an interesting view.
Michael, honorary Canadian, we love you. Have a great day, buddy.
Thanks, Norman.
The Leafs Convo started with Mike and Norm just a few years ago, but it's you who will take this podcast into the future thanks to your amazing support. We'd like to offer special recognition to Dr. Faisal Rahman of London, Ontario, for his dedication, commitment, and contribution to this podcast. Dr. Rahman has been a major backer of sports projects, ideas, and innovations throughout London and beyond. His involvement in helping the growth of the Leafs Convo is not only appreciated, but a true honor. Thank you, Dr. Faisal Rahman. So that'll put a bow on the latest edition of the Leafs Convo. Thank you so much for all of your support, your comments. I wanted to give a shout out to Hockey Highlights, Gino Vanelli, Fash on YouTube. Your comments are amazing. We love the knowledge, good, bad, ugly. Keep it coming at us so we can continue to grow this show in the right way. We're not experts. Mike's more of an expert than I am. I'm just the show host. I kind of am the adhesive to this entire process, and we need your expertise as well, your 2 cents, your commentary, your knowledge, your thoughts, your way of thinking to help us keep this show going, help us propel this show to the next level, because I believe we're going to get there. At I am Sports Heart on Twitter, at the Leafs Convo on Twitter. You can reach out to Mike Augello at Mike and Buffalo on Twitter. And of course, you hear me talk about the YouTube page. Go there, like something, dislike something. As long as you subscribe, that's what matters the most. For Mike Augello, I'm Norman James. This is the Leafs Convo. Talk to you soon.